I'm glad you joined me for Bible study today as we study the Sunday school lesson together. It comes from the 20th chapter of Luke's Gospel, verses 9 through 19. Luke's Gospel, 9 through 19. It's going to be this parable of the husbandman. It's an interesting parable. I have preached from it a couple of times, but it's kind of an unusual parable that Jesus gives. Now, you remember a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Or as I've been saying lately, since we have to wear masks, it's what's behind the mask that's being said. What's behind the mask that's being said. But it's a heavenly story, and Jesus is going to give us that heavenly story. Beginning with verse 9, he began to speak to the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard and let it out to the husbandmen and went into a far country for a long time. And at a season he sent a servant to the husbandmen. They should give them the fruit of the vineyard. The husband beat him, sent him away empty, and again sent another servant. They beat him also and treated him shamefully, sent him away empty. And again he sent a third. They wounded him also and cast him out. Then said the Lord of the vineyard, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be that they will reverence him when they see him." But when the husbandmen saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours." They cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. What therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do unto them? He shall come to destroy these husbandmen, and shall give the vine to another. When they heard it, they said, "God forbid." And he beheld them, and said, "What is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon this stone shall be broken, but on whosoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder." And the chief priest and the scribes the same hour sought to lay hands on him, but they feared the people, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them. Now that's the reading of the scripture. The background is that there are many instances of the husbandman. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Normally, when they talked about the husbandman, it meant that those who were sent by the Lord that owned it to take care of it. Now, for instance, I'm convinced that you're going to find various husbandmen, for instance, all kinds. The husbandman of the law was Moses. God said, "Moses, take this to my people." Now, as you know, Moses had a hard time getting them to do anything that God wanted them to do. And they spent 40 years in the wilderness because of their stubbornness, because of their inability to follow leadership. And God had left it up to Moses as the husbandman. He was a good husbandman, but God had sent him to do a job. That was the law. And then there was the law of the conquerors. Joshua. God said to Joshua, "I want you to take the people into the promised land." Not Moses. I'm going to let him see it, but he can't go in. You are the husbandman. I am counting on you to do the job that I've given you to do. And that's to see that the people get into the promised land. Joshua had trouble finally got them in to the promised land. Now, we also find judges. Gideon was one of the judges. God gave him the job of helping the people to understand more of the laws of God and to give good counsel to those who had broken the laws of God and to do what they needed to do. So he was one of the judges. He was a husbandman. And then David was a husbandman, a king. The very heart of God panted after David. He gave David a job to do. And sometimes David did it well, and sometimes he didn't do it so well, but he was God's husbandman that he sent to get a job done. There's also the husbandman in terms of the scribe. Ezra was a scribe. That's what God called him to do and sent him to do for the nation of Israel. And then the reformers. Nehemiah was a reformer. God said, I want you to go back and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah followed God he never did have an easy job. It was tough on him from beginning to end, but he stayed by the stuff. Now, there are bad husbands also, those that you send out to do and they just simply don't do it. This is the case of the bad husbandman. Now, normally when they talked about husbandmen, they were talking about those that had what we would call today leased the property, and that they would get a certain percentage of the fruit of the vine, and the owner would get a certain percentage of the vine, the fruit of the vine. We understand that in our parlance. It may be a little more difficult in this parlance, but nonetheless, here's the husbandman, and this is the parable that he uses for the husbandman. And for some reason, he stays longer than he meant to stay, and the husbandman takes on much more time. And here, not only was there the crop that had to be harvested, but there was the crop of unrighteousness that followed. The first one came, they sent him away, beat him up, sent him away. 3 times sent him away. We don't know how many other times they might have sent someone. And finally, the father said, I'll send my son. And surely, when I send my son, they will have respect for him, they will reverence him, and they will do what they promised to do. You see, they were breaking the promise. They were supposed to give part of the fruit of the vine to the Lord as his pay for using the property. So here they are with an understanding that the son's coming. But when the son comes, it's not the reception that the father anticipated. And when the son comes, we see that they, for the first time, understand what God was trying to tell them to do all along. And they fixed in their mind even more solidly that they had to get rid of Jesus. These 3 servants, every one of them, part of the parable. They sent John the Baptist. He was a husbandman. God sent him to make way for Jesus Christ. They beat them shamefully, took John's head off, killed him over the whims of a dancing girl. So here's the parable that's going to mean so much to the Heavenly Father. It's going to mean so much to those who have rejected his Son. Then said the Lord of the vineyard, what shall I do? And he sent his Son, my beloved Son, in this festering situation. Surely they will reverence him. When they saw him, let's kill him. They cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. The Word of God, so far, in this parable has been totally disregarded. They killed the prophets. Israel killed the prophets. Case in point, John the Baptist. Now, what are they going to do with the Son? Jesus is referring to himself. I am going. The Father has sent me. I'm going. I'm going to try to straighten up the situation. I want them to believe in the Father, but in order to believe in the Father, they'll have to believe in me. To have faith in God, they'll have to have faith in me. And even my disciples will now understand that they're in a different arena. They now pray through me to get to the Father. They understand that. They're beginning to understand that. And so Jesus is going to walk into the situation, fulfilling the prophetic message of the Old Testament, born of a virgin, grew up sinless life, died on a cross. But that death on the cross came at the hands of sinful man. So the owner in the parable sets the standard. They're going to reverence his Son. They never do. They simply make up their mind they're going to kill him as soon as possible. With any logic, sin blinds us, and we should be warned of that. We should know this is he makes it a point, his only begotten Son. That's terminology used for Jesus. That's probably how they're catching on to this parable very quickly. And then this resolve to kill him. What will be the Father's reaction when they kill the Son? He would come. No longer would he expect messengers to do his work. God will come and clean it up himself. He will destroy this wicked husbandman. He will execute judgment on the ones who killed his Son, and he will give the vineyard to someone else. And he did. Jesus, you remember Israel believed that God was only God for them. Jehovah was their God. He was not the God of the Gentiles. And all of that changed. He was not the God of the down and out. All of that changed. He was not the God of the oppressed. All of that changed with Jesus Christ. He comes and he tells them in the parable that in the shadow of the cross, he's going to die that they might live. Now, in this, it's not a coincidence that Jesus told this parable in the shadow of the cross. It's not incidental. It's deliberate. He wanted them to know, number one, that he was going to die, and number two, how he was going to die. He had to be lifted up. That's what he had talked about. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. He had to be lifted up. He had to be crucified. He couldn't be stoned to death. The common capital punishment of Judaism was stoning. You remember? They stoned Stephen. They tried to stone Paul. So stoning was the method of capital punishment. But he had to be lifted up. He had to die the Roman way, death by crucifixion. So here he goes, and he takes on this willingly and gives himself. Three things. One, he endured the cross that we might be granted the riches of God's love. That we might be granted the riches of God's love. Number two, he endured the cross and made the sacrifice to prove that God's love is necessary for salvation. God's love is necessary for salvation. Oh, how he loves you and me. The love of God. There's one sentence in that love of God. if all the oceans were ink and every man had a stalk or had a pen, he could not write enough about the love of God. It's rich and it's pure and it's for you and it's for me. So here he is proving the love of God. And then he sends his Son as the necessity for our salvation. Jesus Christ is not an alternate. Never has been. He's not an alternate. And the death on the cross made all of that more a reality. If you are going to heaven when you die, you're going to go all the way with Jesus Christ, or you simply cannot go. There is no other way. But he's such a good person. I applaud that. I love good people. I love good people. Whoever they are, I love them. But if they're lost, they're lost. Good people can be lost. Nice people can be lost. But there are no if, and, or buts. Jesus Christ is the only way to be saved. That's God's acceptable plan. He's the one who planned it. Jesus is the one who executed it. And now he moves into talking about this idea of the stone, the cornerstone, we're going to see. Beginning in verse 16b, he talks about the cornerstone. When they heard it, they said, God forbid. They couldn't take it any longer. He's going to tell them more about what's going to happen. And he beheld and said unto them, What is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected. Jesus, whom you rejected, if I could just translate it. The same has become the head of the corner. Now, all I know about construction, you could put in a thimble. But I do know this, and I've been taught this. In that day, when you laid the cornerstone, everything else had to square with the cornerstone. You didn't adjust the cornerstone, you adjusted everything else. That's still true today. Jesus is the cornerstone, and you don't adjust Jesus to fit the needs of society, you adjust society to fit the demands of Jesus. That's critical that we understand that. We must understand the cornerstone is irrevocable, it is irreplaceable. You cannot get around it. You must square your life by the cornerstone, who is Jesus himself. The stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And the chief priest and the scribes the same hour sought to lay hands on him, but they feared the people, for they perceived that this parable was spoken against them. And they were absolutely correct. It was spoken against them. He was the cornerstone. These builders that claimed that they knew the law and that they knew what God wanted had missed it entirely. And so they see God's plan. I'm the foundation stone of God's plan. I'm the foundation stone of God's plan. If you square with me, the rest of your life will be squared up by God himself. Someone has said it well. We don't run to God to get cleaned up. We don't run to God to get clean. We run to God to get cleaned up. And when we run to God to get cleaned up, it's because of this cornerstone. Now, there is a judgment that is going to come, and that's what he's talking about. If you fall on the cornerstone, you'll be broken. But if the cornerstone falls on you, judgment has come. Now, the best I understand judgment in the New Testament is that there's going to come the day that we will stand before God, both saints and sinners. And there is a Lamb's Book of Life. And if my name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, I'm saved. If it is not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, I am lost. Now, those who are lost without Jesus Christ, for whatever reason, lostness is lostness. I had not been at seminary very long, at Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary, until the then president, Dr. Robert Naylor, spoke in chapel. I'll never forget his sermon. Made an impact on my life when he asked the very simple question, how lost is lost? Now, for some, that would just be a question, maybe even a rhetorical question. But for me, it was reality. How lost is lost? And Dr. Naylor started delineating. It was Missions Week, Lottie Moon Christmas offering time. How lost is lost? Lost enough to send Lottie Moon to China, to spend her life telling the Chinese people about Jesus Christ and getting salvation into their lives, giving up all of the happiness she might have had at home, giving up marriage, giving up all family. And in that day, you couldn't come and go to China like you can now. And Lottie Moon, when the communists took over and everything began to be different, she had to return to America. And when she got to Kobe, Japan, she died. And the reason for her death? Malnutrition. Whatever food she had given to the poor Chinese people. And she died before she could make it home. But she went home to be with you. How lost is lost? Lost enough that God would call Lottie Moon to give her life in service for Him. How lost is lost? Lost enough that God would call out a young man and put him in ministry. Calling out the young man, putting him into ministry, knowing that it's going to be a tough thing from beginning to end. Knowing and understanding. But he knows, he senses, he believes that people are lost without Jesus, and he puts him into ministry. And he goes through the tough times to get to the best times, because lost is lost. And I'll never forget how he ended that sermon. How lost is lost. Lost enough that God's Son would give His life on a cross for sinners like us. Lost enough that God would send His Son to die for our sin. So when the judgment comes on the lost, and that judgment is real, that person will spend eternity separated from God, separated from love, separated from everything that's good, lost forever in eternity in the fires of hell. How lost is lost? Well, if you're saved today, you know how lost is. You know what the condition of your life once was, and you know what it is now. And if you're lost today, you can be saved. You can come to Jesus. Lord, forgive me of my sin. Come into my life. Make me what you want me to be. I'll praise your name eternally. Everything squares with the cornerstone. God bless you for watching today.